right, we are ready to begin. You may start when you're ready, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October 25th meeting of the Transportation Planning and Environment Committee. We have a number of guests this morning that I'd like to introduce, but I'm going to go ahead and start with introductions for anybody in the room in Government Center. Is anybody in the room? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody virtually, starting with committee members. I'm Julie Eisel, committee chair.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Ed Newton, committee member.
And we have staff.
Taiwo Jaiova, city manager's office.
And then how about any of our visitors?
Darlene Heater, University City Partners.
I'm sorry, John, I jumped over you. I didn't see you there.
No worries. John Lewis, Executive Director, Charlotte Area Transit System.
Michael Smith, Charlotte Center City Partners.
Jason Lars, Charlotte Area Transit System.
Do we have anyone else online?
Toby Holmes, University City Partners.
Monica Holmes, Planning Department.
Lorna Allen, Planning Department.
Okay, and did you get to introduce yourself? Are you on? Okay, we'll go ahead and just get started then. Our first agenda, we've got 3 agenda items this morning, and our first one is an update on Envision My Ride, which we'll look forward to hearing about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Lewis and Jason Lawrence to get us started.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the Transportation and Committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning to give you an update on our Envision My Ride program, which is centered entirely on building a better bus system. If we'll go to the next slide, this program began in the spring of 2018 with the opening of the Lynx Blue Line extension. At that time, as we were continuing to expand our rail program, it became very clear that as we were building high-capacity rail transportation, we had ignored the necessity of building a better bus network. Almost 70% of our daily riders pre-pandemic got from their origin to their destination on board a bus. And we needed to take a fresh look at our system that was based upon an outdated model of the hub and spoke, which required so many of our riders to come from the outskirts of one bus, cross the platform, get onto another bus just to get to their destination. The average bus trip at that time, if you needed to transfer, was almost 90 minutes. Now, I know for many of us, if our morning and afternoon commutes were 90 minutes or greater, we'd either find a new place to live or perhaps find a new job opportunity. And so many of our customers don't have that option. And so it was very evident that we needed to take a fresh look. Envision My Ride is based on 3-pronged approach. First, getting the structure of our bus system corrected. Second, focusing on frequency, providing more frequent service. And third, focusing on reliability. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in spring of 2018, with the opening of the Blue Line extension, we began the restructuring of our bus system. 22 existing routes were adjusted to connect with the Blue Line extension, and we added 9 new routes, including 4 crosstown routes. In the fall of 2018, we adjusted 24 additional routes to move completely away from the hub and spoke and really created more of a grid system. That went off on October of 2018, and we received very positive feedback from our customers. Then we began focusing on the second plank of this plan, and that's increasing frequency. More than half our routes at that time had headways. That's the intervals between bus one comes to a stop and the next bus arrives of 30 minutes or greater. A large portion of that, 45 minutes or an hour. So imagine if you're at a bus stop and you miss a bus and you need to wait 45 minutes or an hour for the next bus to come, that could be the difference between being able to get a job or certainly hold on to employment. And so frequency was a very important portion of this, and we began incrementally adding additional frequency on our routes. We increased 4 routes from that 30-minute headway to 15. We introduced the Metro Rapid I-77 Express Lane service, but we still have very far to go in terms of adding additional frequency. And the conversations that we are having now about increasing resources through the Transformational Mobility Network will be able to give CATS the ability to significantly accelerate this program. Our goal at the end of the day is that none of CATS routes will have headways greater than 30 minutes, and the vast majority of our bus routes will focus on 15-minute service or better. And then third, reliability, as we continue to work to find new techniques, new technologies that allow us to mimic the reliability of our rail service into our bus service. And so we had 2 pilots for bus-only lanes, the 4th Street pilot and Central Avenue pilot. We'll continue to look for other opportunities to invest in infrastructure that will make our bus system as reliable as possible. Those include technologies such as queue jumpers, where a bus comes to an intersection and is able to work around the waiting traffic to get through the intersection, and also maximizing the city's investment in its traffic signal system that would give our buses traffic signal priority along certain corridors. Again, we've gotten the structure correct. We're investing in frequency, and next is the reliability of our system. When you put all 3 of these planks together, we believe at the end of that will give us the better bus network that we're all looking for. And so, Madam Chair, with that, I'm going to introduce Jason Lawrence, who's our Director of Planning and Programming for CATS, and he will go through the rest of the presentation, which will give it a lot more detail on the plan moving forward. Jason?
Great. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Madam Chair. What John laid out was that 3-tiered approach to the Envision My Ride effort through structural, frequency, and reliability. And, that last piece that he talked about, giving our buses priority system-wide, that's a piece that we're working on right now that will lay out a capital plan that'll make bus trips more faster, more reliable, and more enjoyable, and to help improve those connections. So we're 2 or more buses come together, make sure that we have the capital improvements at the stop level through shelters, through transit centers, community transit centers, to make that a more easier transfer between modes. That's a big piece of what the bus priority study, and we'll be coming back to you later to give you more details on that effort. But today I wanted to focus on all those service improvements that John talked about. Next slide. All the high frequency aspirational network items that we have coming forward. And I wanted to pause for a moment on this slide to show the map on the right is a graphical representation of those 22 high frequency routes. And as John stated, only 5 today are high frequency. So we still have a ways to go to meet that aspirational network. But in order to achieve that aspirational network of high frequency throughout our system, it's going to cost. As you see there on the screen, there's over a 50% increase on the revenue hours. That's the service that we put out on the street. And on the right-hand side, you see what that cost would be on an annual basis. So new local funding will have to be identified in order to achieve the operating of those new hours to put out on the street. Next slide. And the goal would be able to roll that out over 4 fiscal years of 22 high frequency routes. And what that means for us, that is defined as 15 minutes all day long. So not having a morning and afternoon peak and 30 minutes throughout the day. We're talking about throughout the day, have 15-minute frequency on those 22 high frequency routes. Take all of our routes that are 60 minutes, 45 minutes, have no route that has a frequency greater than 30 minutes. And then as you see there, we have 19 that are still 40 plus frequency today. So it's bringing down those to 30 minutes. And then 15 new routes to areas throughout our county. As you see on the list there, we have a couple of routes that would serve the towns more intently, but also some of the edges of our current service area, like Plaza Extension and Mallard Creek, but also providing better service to the Ballantyne area, Blakeney, and the Pavilion University area. Now, on the capital side, we're recommending through this aspirational network that we would implement 50 mobility hubs throughout the county. And mobility hubs sounds like a very technical term, but at the end of the day, it's just a capital improvement to make sure that our stops and our transit centers and our light rail stations have the amenities in place to facilitate connections to scooters, to bike share, to car share, to first last mile services, bus and rail, and all manner of the emerging technologies we'll see coming into the future. And that's very scalable from the bus stop, as I said, all the way up to a large park and ride. And then additionally, that capital plan will include adding amenities to 50% of our existing bus stops. So that could be shelters, that could be benches, concrete pad, small seats that would be attached to the pole. We see this as a major goal in ways to improve the quality of the service to each of our customers. Next slide. So what will that also take on the capital side? It's going to require more vehicles. Up to 100 vehicles will be required to expand this over those 4 fiscal years. And as you see there, and the cost that we're looking at now is looking at our hybrid bus fleet, the total cost of $95 million. Now, what's not on the screen here is what that increase would be with electrification of vehicles. At the time of the Envision My Ride a few years ago, we were just looking at hybrid. And now that electrification will, of course, be a bit more than that. And that's the analysis that we're currently doing. It may also require more vehicles. And so that's another piece of the pilot that starts next year will help us understand how to operationally deploy electric vehicles throughout our fleet. Our goal for that first fiscal year would be to work within our existing fleet, find efficiencies, find ways to convert maybe some routes to more on-demand services and deploy that to those high frequency routes. And we would do that incrementally delivery of those vehicles as you see there on the screen. Next slide. So what does that look like? Where will each of these services, new services and frequency improvements be rolled out each year? As you see there on fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, we would have completely implemented our 22 high frequency routes. As you see on the screen, Wilkinson Boulevard, Tuckasegee, South Tryon. And some of these routes aren't necessarily roads or areas. So like the Belmont community is the route number 4 that serves the Lynx Blue Line station. The Hidden Valley route is Route 211, which serves the Hidden Valley community. And then as we get into fiscal year 25, the Providence and Randolph Park, Tyvola, Statesville, Graham, Freedom, and Mount Holly roads would all see 15-minute frequency implemented all day long. In the middle column there, those are all our routes today that are 40 plus minutes. And some of these are 60 minutes. This is bringing them all down to 30 minutes goals. And we would implement over phases over time and completing that by fiscal year 27. The new services, we would also phase in over those 4 years. In the first year, implementing new services to Albemarle Road and Sunset Road and Ballantyne. And then in the final year, in fiscal 27, we would do the bulk of those new services, new express services to Mooresville, better service to the towns, Matthews and Lawyers Road, Mint Hill, and extensions to those areas that are outside of our current service area, like Blakeney, Central Piedmont Community College Levine campus, and the University and Pavilion area. Next slide. And with that, John and I'm sure we'll be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Driggs or Mr. Newton, do you have any questions? Oh, I see Mr. Driggs.
So one of the difficulties in creating a system like this is if your population density is relatively low, you may not have a lot of passengers on buses operating that frequently. How do you model revenue here? What assumptions are you making about passenger load factors on the buses?
So,
Go ahead, Jason.
so right now we are looking at our passengers per revenue hour right now. We're in a bit of a time now where it's difficult to look at revenue hour and passenger loads given what's happening with the pandemic. We can look at older information to do that. But I think that in order for a service to be successful, it needs to be frequent, and that over time will increase ridership.
Yeah, that's the conundrum is you need to start running those buses and then hope they, after you build it, that they will come. But the point is, I look at buses now that I see based on our current service, and there are often very few people in them. And obviously, when you have enough frequency to make the bus service attractive, you also really need a huge increase. And the question is, as you get to some of the more remote areas you described, are people going to be close enough to a bus stop to get out of their car? Because that's what this is really about, is getting people out of their cars and having them willing to walk to a bus stop. I lived in Manhattan for a long time, and it was easy. You go down to the subway, there was a train every 5 minutes, and there were people on the train. I'm just curious. I guess I'll just look forward to hearing more about how you use, say, other cities or metrics like population density to infer the demand for bus services, even if you have a robust and reliable and frequent bus service, just because of how spread out everybody is.
Yeah, Mr. Driggs, what you're outlining is sort of the art of creating a transit system. The 22 high frequency routes that we will move out, we will implement in first. Those are routes that we see the data, we have the ridership that are pretty high ridership routes today. When I say today, pre-pandemic ridership. It really is that next group as we are looking at the growth of the region, the growth of our city. Those 15 new routes that we plan on implementing are really those that fit into that conversation and the questions that you're bringing up. And really it's the art of creating rather than the science. We can run data on the routes that we're operating now and how much better it would be with more frequency. But when you establish brand new routes, you're working more off of the assumptions that with better, more frequent service that you will attract ridership. And really there isn't a clear formula on that. It typically takes 2 to 3 years for a new route to really mature and get to a point where you're reaching your goals. But we will continue to explore that and have those conversations with the committee and full council as we begin implementation.
And there aren't, I'm not an expert in this field, but there aren't comparisons like there isn't data from other cities or ways that you can use general concepts like density of population, average distance to the stop, et cetera, to get some sort of insight into what ridership you can expect.
I think all of those factors play a role into it. But other things such as congestion level also is very important. And so it isn't necessarily an apples to apples comparison, but in those that we can find quantifiable data, we certainly use that. And the models that we use to predict ridership consider many of those factors.
And John, thank you for that. I don't want to let you down, so wanted to talk about money for a minute. In the past, we have looked at roughly $100 million in capital costs and roughly $30 to $40 million in operating expense. And looking at the slides we just saw with numbers on them, I couldn't make the comparison with that reference to what we're now doing. Can we put those back up? There were two, actually. There was the first one.
Yes, if you could go back to that chart, please.
Yeah, let's work.
One more, actually. So this is, we'll start with this one. So we have the pre-COVID, our budget pre-COVID, our operating cost was $72.6 million. You'll look at that second line of Envision My Ride. If we were to implement the entire program overnight, our operating costs will go up 45.9 million, right in that area that you had mentioned before. But this is the operating cost. This is fuel in our vehicles. These are operators behind the wheel and additional mechanics under the hood. Now, again, these numbers were based on our current fleet of using hybrid vehicles. If you go to the next slide, one back. As you all know, we are in the midst of transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles. We will receive the first electric bus the end of this year, sometime late November, early December, and we will be running a pilot over the year 2022 for 18 vehicles. At that point, we will be able to, we'll have great information on the make and model that has the best performance. We are trying 2 different manufacturers models during that test. So it may be that these numbers will go up on the capital side, and the cost of the vehicle may go up. We will know better after next year's electric vehicle pilot what the full cost of implementation will be. But this gives you the information we have here, gives you sort of a baseline of comparison of how we will implement this service over 4 years. Again, it would not be even with all of the funding availability, you wouldn't want to go out and make a massive capital purchase of 100+ vehicles, because at some point, 10 to 12 years in the future, another council and another executive is going to have to figure out how to replace those vehicles, and that's just too big an apple to take a bite off. So we want to stay in that 30 to 40 bus range that'll take us about 4 years to implement.
But John, that's their problem. So I get that, and that makes good sense. And do you continue to work on an assumption that you'll get about a quarter of your operating expense from fare box collections, or does that ratio change?
No, that's will remain our expectations. But as we continue to work through working our way out of the pandemic, when we get back to pre-pandemic level ridership, those are the expectations that we're looking for.
So you would look to fund the capital costs and 3/4 of the operating expenses that you've outlined from new revenue sources?
That's correct, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Newton, do you have any questions?
A quick comment, Madam Chair. I want to thank in Jason's presentation. I was especially happy to see the new routes that were discussed, I guess, in one of the later slides, particularly out towards down Albemarle Road, Plaza Road Extension. I feel confident that there will be ridership there. There has been a need in those areas for quite some time. So I just wanted to thank them both for taking that into account. The Finco area in particular has voiced their need for quite some time, and it sounds like they have been heard. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Newton. John, thank you for this presentation, and Jason, thank you very much. We have all been anxious to hear more about the plans for the bus system. I have a couple of questions for you. There's 5 high-frequency routes operating right now, is that right? Of the 22?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a way that we could develop a plan? And I know Darlene Heater might find this something she would like to do as well. But, you know, I was thinking about our rezoning meeting the other night, and we had 2 major projects, both over 50 acres, that it seems like would be ideal locations for mobility hubs. Is there a way to work proactively with some of these developers and eventual landlords, that we can start to really either set aside space or set aside funding from developers who want to have a mobility hub, so that we could start at least to develop mobility hubs, and maybe around, I don't remember exactly where the 5 routes are right now, but is there a need for a mobility hub amongst those 5? And is there a way to work now before we have an eventual funding source to build out mobility hubs, or at least get them planned and started?
Sure, absolutely, Madam Chair. I mean, we do that regularly, work with developers to either install bus stops or shelter pads or bench pads. We do that and have been doing that for many years. Even in the concept of mobility hubs, we've been introducing to the development community, the river district rezoning. There's a line in there to work with the developer to set aside space for a transit center mobility hub. The Valentine rezoning, we work with that developer to not only reserve space for the future light rail, but also to set up bus stops that could act as mobility hubs within that development. And so we are certainly doing that now. And then in the case of the rezonings coming in around the university area, Darlene Tovey and I and a few other stakeholders have been working on some first last mile solutions that through our bus priority study. And we're going to be focusing on the university area through that effort to really understand what is that first last mile solution out there. And it's probably a mix of public and private type of investment to deliver, I think, what that service profile is for that area. So that is certainly something we are actively doing with the development community and will continue to do.
Okay, great. I think it would be really helpful and I'm just in my mind, I still have the vision of what we saw in Columbus, and that's very different than anything we have here. And if we could even get one to that level up and running, I think it really helps people see why an investment in our bus system is so critical, transformative, and cool, frankly. If we can make bus travel cool, that would be a big win for us. So anyway, all kidding aside, I would love to see, us have a mobility hub, a full service mobility hub like that up and running, even before we have the major source of revenue. So thank you.
Madam Chair, the Charlotte Pike site has got land sort of identified for potential Silver Line routes. So are we having a conversation there as well about how the buses work?
Yeah,
so throughout the entire Silver Line corridor, there's a bus rail integration plan under development. So that's something we would do at each station area throughout, including stations near the Blackman Foundry area.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. If we don't have any other questions, we're going to move along then. Thank you, John and Jason.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members.
And I apologize because my computer just fell asleep. So the next, we have Mr. Winston, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, Braxton Winston, committee member.
Good morning. Okay, I apologize because my agenda now has disappeared, but I think the next item was our Center City 2040 plan.
Yes, and if I can quickly jump in, that we have an hour left, so hopefully this item is really, Michael will summarize what they've brought in front of you previously and ask for a referral to go to council and a public hearing. So Michael.
Great. Thank you, Taiwo. So Monica is not going to provide any primer. You want me to just jump in?
No.
Okay, sounds good.
Nope.
So thank you, Ty. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the TPE committee. Pleasure to be back with you and give you a quick recap of the public review process. And we've got some slides that go with this. If we could pull those up, that would be excellent. But I'm going to move ahead. As you know, draft documents were released on July 23rd, which initiated a 7-week public review process ending the week of September 13th. During this process, we used multiple channels to make sure that the community knew that we needed their input, their ideas. This was media and interviews and social media, direct mail, reminders to the 500 community members who had signed up for additional information, including community leaders and focus groups, and through the hard copies that were distributed to 11 branch libraries. The team also met with various stakeholders and neighborhood groups, including the Northwest Corridor Council of Elders, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Climate Leaders, and the Tuesday morning breakfast forum, just to name a few. And in the coming weeks, we will be meeting with groups like Charlotte East and North End Partners. To summarize, the community has cared a ton about this effort, and it's been demonstrated by the 480 individuals who've attended meetings since then and commented on the draft plan. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. When the plan was released, when we released the draft document, we reminded the community this is not finished work. We really want your feedback. And that feedback has been collected and it's been reviewed by the project management team and our consultants. Through this process, we've uncovered new recommendations and revisions that will make the plan stronger. So I really feel good about the way it's gotten better. I'll share some of those highlights with you today. Next slide, please. In the review process, several officials advised that it would be beneficial to include language that clarifies the purpose of the vision plan, really a little bit of a preamble of what it is and what it isn't. And we've got this incredible tradition. I think it's one of the real strengths of our city, and that's having these adopted downtown vision plans, center city vision plans. And these plans do not obligate current or future council or other governing bodies to commit funds or to advance any project. Rather, the vision plans are meant to reflect the aspirations and values of the community while inspiring current and future action, not set binding policy. Also, we were asked to make it clear that the ideas set forth in this plan extend beyond the city's scope, and some of the strategies will require different responsible entities to be in the lead, considering these recommendations and specific plans, but again, not obligating them. Next slide. There was other community feedback that revealed the need to clarify or refine some of the plan content or intent. An example, relative to plan goals, it was suggested that within the inclusive economy and growth, that we need to make it clear that the growth targets noted are across a 20-year time horizon. They were not annual targets. Another, and if John's still on, he'll know that we had reached out to him about this. There was additional context suggested in the statements around mode share in the easy access to mobility. We need to clearly state that we should work on actually this is different, this is CDOT. We should work on reducing the number of trips to the center city through single occupancy vehicles and create a mode share goal that will work through CDOT's strategic mobility plan. We love this suggestion. These are ones that we think that we plan to adjust the plan to reflect. So mode share goals. And then within goal number 6, resilient low carbon urban neighborhoods, we need to add language acknowledging that climate change is not just a public health issue, or is as much a public health issue as it is about infrastructure. There was also input, if included, would strengthen the objective of the plan's focus area. For example, there was a comment related to Tryon Street focus area that suggested that we expand the street vendor program beyond Tryon Street to other neighborhood centers throughout the center city. Great idea. Another noted that the opportunities within the medical and wellness innovation district, so that focus area, should be linked to the broader education ecosystem, not just the academic institutions that are currently called out. Next slide, please. There were also comments and suggestions for new ideas from the community that the team believes are going to make the plan stronger. Relative to plan goals, suggested strategies that the project team and consultants think to enhance the plan. To help achieve the goal of easy, accessible mobility, someone suggested that we explore that transit be more equitable and accessible by modernizing our fare system, potentially through things like distance-based pricing, fare capping for certain periods, and even some fare-free zones. These are ideas that we are sharing with CATS and we'll discuss with them as we consider including them in the plan. Healthy and safe neighborhoods, someone suggested we establish a food security fund to help support the development of brick and mortar food providers in some of our food deserts using models like co-ops to get better access to fresh foods to areas that lack it. To strengthen the goal of abundant parks, public spaces, and natural areas, our partners within the City Arborist Department requested that we include the recommendation to update the Uptown Streetscape Plan, last updated in 2001. This accounts for the diversity of our aging canopy of street trees. Resilient, low-carbon urban neighborhoods, advocacy groups pointed out that we needed to mitigate the urban heat island effect, especially since it's built upon urban areas and low-income neighborhoods that often have less tree canopy and can be a much hotter part of the city, and that there are some smart surface tactics like reflective or green roofs and pervious pavement, which would also reduce urban heat gain and flooding risks. Great ideas that we want to put in the plan. And in our conversation with West End stakeholders, they felt like that focus area, they pointed out the fact that we needed to replace and enhance the the bridge over Highway 16, especially now that there's streetcar service and we'll have more pedestrian traffic. Its current conditions have narrow sidewalks and poor lighting. Next slide. We also received comments that the team is not recommending relative to the goal of easy, accessible mobility. There was a suggestion to establish parking maximums for new developments in Uptown. And we are concerned that we fully support the idea and have it in the recommendation that we eliminate parking minimums, requiring developers to create parking when it's not necessary by the program that they intend to bring to our center city. We think that's a bad idea. We're concerned that creating parking maximums could have some unintended consequences, which would raise the cost of parking in Uptown, and it would minimize the effectiveness of our center city, which provides some of the greatest jobs for our community, and it would make it harder for people to get to work because of cost of transportation, because we don't have the comprehensive transportation network right now as an alternative. We're also concerned that it could have the unintended consequence of discouraging further development at the center of our transit system, which would reduce the return on investment for the transit vision that we're currently investing in. Another idea that was offered was to help achieve our resilient, low-carbon urban neighborhoods was to consider permanently closing more streets throughout the center city. And we've seen this model cause really great damage to small business owners and increase congestion in urban areas. We think it's the right idea to study one street at a time and to see what the recommendations are from our planning department and from our consultants and evaluate it kind of one system at a time. But bringing that as a comprehensive policy based on the results that we've seen from other markets, we do not think it belongs as a recommendation in the plan. Next slide. So what's next? The project team is preparing a document that will summarize these revisions and the summary will be forwarded to you and posted on the website. Next slide. And looking ahead, the path, there's additional community review and adoption. In late November, we would like to be on the council agenda for a public comment session. And then following the public comment session, we hope to return to the Planning Commission and receive and request a referral from them also to the full council for adoption, probably sometime in the December timeframe. And then after your adoption, we would seek the endorsement of the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners. Next slide. We're excited about what this plan has in it. It is such a different plan. We think that it is based on the current values of this community. There was so much community input. It is a broad and bold vision. And sessions like this, we don't get to go back to all those. We're only talking about the ways we're trying to improve it. But we've been able to share with many of you, and we're excited about the community that is envisioned through this plan. And we're glad to answer any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair and Council.
Thank you, Michael. Let's see. Committee members, Braxton. Oh, Ed's got his hand up, and Matt. So Ed, go ahead and I'll take Matt.
Thank you. So Michael, I wanted to say, having been pretty outspoken in an earlier meeting, I really appreciate the clarifications you provided here and also your responsiveness to the input that you've received. This is a really excellent feedback that you've brought to us, and I do appreciate it. One question I have is, this particular effort has not operated within the bounds of the Center City Partners municipal tax district, right? So as you go to implement, will you be able to kind of stay involved in trying to further the goals of this plan? Or, I mean, I don't want to get political here, but how will that work?
It's a great question. This is not Center City Partners plan. This is the City of Charlotte's planning document. And I always like the way Taiwo describes it as kind of the next step coming out of the comprehensive plan, and that we'll need to have many of these across our community. So this plan, there's parts of it that will work into our annual program of work. There will be a separate implementation effort. And for those areas that are not part of the municipal service district, there will be leadership that's called into action, whether that is, North End Partners or some of the leaders in the historic West End, which are not part of the MSD, but there are specific and bold recommendations within the plan.
So good. I hope you personally will be able to kind of stay engaged in terms of seeing to it that the goals of the plan are respected in the context of a lot of stuff we're doing. A couple of quick comments on parking. We've had a robust discussion in the context of the UDO about parking. So, and I think certainly my views align with yours, but anything that you're discussing on that subject, needs to be in the context of what we're already talking about, minimum, maximum, and the criteria. And I agree with you that trying to cap the amount of parking spaces we create without having previously created better alternatives to driving by car, like we need to get this bus system improvement kind of working, and we need to give people real options, alternatives to driving their cars before we strangle the parking capacity uptown. So I absolutely agree with you about unintended consequences, but just would mention that whatever you discuss about that needs to be in the context of work that we're doing as well on that one. On parks, we had a conversation recently, a couple of county commissioners and a couple of members of council about parks and the need to create more parks. And I thought it was interesting that they sounded as if they thought we were somehow, through our land use decisions, through our zoning process or whatever, going to create capacity or opportunities for parks. When in fact, I think you will appreciate the way you create a park really is to buy land. And that the principal responsibility for that is with the county. So if you're going to tackle open spaces and parks, then I hope you will kind of be pretty aggressive about getting the message across that the parks can happen with a significant commitment from the county. And I think we on City Council would be very happy to support that any way we can. But the fact is that the terms of our agreement with the county are such that Parks and Rec resides with them and not with us. And I would just mention a question. Do you think that the furtherance of this plan could involve an adjustment in millage rates within your municipal service district?
No, there's no recommendations for change in our millage.
Okay.
Those resources are best used on the service side and not on the CapEx side. So that is not the recommendation.
Right. But there's no modification to the kind of service activity or anything. Okay, thanks. Last comment I'll make, a lot of the call for street closures is based on the experience of European cities, in my mind. I mean, you've seen it in places in Europe where they've been very successful in creating pedestrian areas, but they do that often in conjunction with, for one, a completely different city layout, and two, the creation of things like subways. So I'm with you on being cautious about closing streets because there are ramifications if you don't have all of the other requirements met for doing that we probably wouldn't want to occur. Anyway, I appreciate your presentation today, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newton?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for the presentation. I am generally happy with the changes. Of course, what sticks out to me, and it was addressed, but what sticks out to me the most are the parking maximums or lack thereof, I think, in the plan. I understand that we have challenges in Center City from a transit standpoint, but I'm a little puzzled why we couldn't take a more assertive approach, if even gradual approach, to ensuring that we are doing our jobs to encourage public transit. So I guess my question, and I want to pose this to Ty. So if you're still there, Ty, I can't tell if you're on the call still. So if not Ty, then someone in the planning department. Oh, okay, great, thank you. So my question is does this plan, without parking maximums, does it meet or comply with what we are doing within the UDO? It occurred to me during our last meeting when we were given this the prior presentation that we had conflicting policy objectives, and I wanted to ask the lack of a parking maximum in an area like this, where we know we're going to have a larger concentration of people, an even greater opportunity for public transit to be used. To not have parking maximums here seems to undercut the policy goals that we're trying to achieve within the UDO. How do we reconcile the two?
Good question, Councilmember Newton. I think you've hit the crux of the matter. And that's one of the reasons in the UDO we are proposing 3 tiers to address parking. And in areas where we have highest concentration of transit, even if we're not there yet today, we're going to address it in a gradual manner. While we're in, I think Councilmember Drake said it well. There are places where we definitely have a higher concentration of transit. There are other factors that have to be met before you start talking about what to do with parking, taking them away or adding them. Center City is one of those areas where we have highest concentration of transit services. But like you heard from previous presentation, they're not even all 15-minute headways between some of the services. So as we go through our UDO, one of the things that Michael and I have said is that between now and next month, we are going to be meeting with business leaders and developers in Center City to kind of share the UDO with them and discuss the notion of parking. How can we be as practical as possible, and where can this really fit into the in the 3 tiers? we believe that the way the UDO has addressed it right now is the right way to go. And perhaps we have to make some changes to the Center City plan to be consistent with that. But one thing we do know is this. Right now, today, we do not have the high concentration of these types of transit services we want in Center City. And so taking parking away or restricting it is likely going to be an impact on businesses and development. I want to make sure that we do that as cautiously as possible. So we're going to be having that focused meeting within the next few weeks during this first phase of the UDO. And we're going to share a little bit more about this with you when we present the UDO tomorrow to you.
Seeing as how this is a 20-year plan, do we foresee or anticipate having that higher concentration of transit services within Center City within that 20 years? I would assume we would, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Matt, I'm sorry, Ty.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Well, it is a 20-year plan. Our model that we've used all the way back to 1966 is we renew the plan every 10 years. And that's part of the reason why I felt like this was one that we could, we comment in the plan that it actually makes the recommendation that we reconsider parking maximums as the transit system is built out and, is more reliable, more comprehensive so that it doesn't have those unintended consequences. And, much of the CapEx required, I'm anxious about the idea of making policy moves ahead of CapEx moves and ahead of expansion of service.
Can we do better than 10 years? I suppose is my question, because I know we're placing an emphasis on this as a council, and it's my understanding that we'll be doing that very soon within the passage of the new UDO. Or the passage of the UDO. So are we locked in? Are you saying, Michael, that we're locked in and only a review after 10 years?
No. And remember, this is just a vision plan. This does not create the policy. UDO creates the policy. But as Ty shared, we're going to have more conversations about this with our major employers, with our development community, so that we can really make sure that both sides understand what's in the UDO as relates to parking maximums, and that we can share the impact that will have on parking pricing, on development interest, on financeability, some really important issues that have to be weighed among the priorities that you guys are constantly having to wrestle with.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that where we are with the UDO, we feel very comfortable with it. And that's why we have 3 tiers. And that's kind of learning from our TOD ordinance too, which already adopted in terms of how we deal with parking. So as we go forward, we know that this is a vision plan. But if we don't have the right language there, we know that will be a challenge for the UDO at the end of the day. So we're going to make sure that this is something that we have to definitely tidy up, because the policy has to match the regulation. And that's what we have right now in the UDO, is looking at 3 tiers. And the area where you actually have the most impact will be areas where you have highest concentration of services, if you want it for parking spaces, like Center City and other areas as well. So this is not going to be the last conversation about this.
And should there be a conflict arise between this plan and the UDO, it's the UDO that controls. The UDO is what's asserted or what we follow. So I think that provides me some level of comfort, even though I still do have reservations pertaining to this specific item. And so I guess my next question is, what is the action that we are being asked as a committee to do today here? Are we talking about approving this plan in its current form, or is it just allowing the conversations to continue and the work to continue and some of that complementary action between this and the UDO to continue? What exactly are we, if we're going to be taking action and voting today as a committee, what is it that we're taking action and voting on? Is it a recommendation to the council as a whole? I don't know who would answer.
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I know that Michael will tell you that traditionally Center City has taken its plans to both the city and the county for action. The city has traditionally adopted it in the spirit of South End Vision Plan that you did a couple of years ago. And the county has always endorsed it. But we've always also had conversation around what council's desire is with regards to some of the big ticket items in this plan that could result or may result in some financial implications in the future. While yes, this is the city's plan, this is more of a joint plan, a partnership between us and the county and Center City, developing this. So council has to take one action or the other, whether to receive it or to endorse it or to adopt it, or whatever action the council takes is going to definitely, I think you're going to ask questions around the funding impact or financing impact of that. We may end up approaching this like we did with the comprehensive plan, and I think Michael said it earlier, where we actually have certain aspects that may be, like Queen's Park is the one that comes up often, that may be addressed in a preamble document of the plan and would not necessarily be an action that council is being asked to fund or finance in the near future, but rather adopting the plan without necessarily, adopting any one of those items that could result in financial obligations to council. And then Center City can come to us or to you in the future and request actions on each one of those items based on conversation with city and funding opportunities.
So I guess my question is more, and I appreciate that information and context. I guess my question is more about what we're doing here today as a committee. It would be my desire to see something more substantive pertaining to parking maximums, particularly the understanding the length of time that this plan would be enacted, and some of the challenges in ensuring maximums in the interim. I just feel like for me, that's something I would like to see solidified a little bit more in this plan, and causes me a bit of pause today. And I'm just wondering, are we going to be voting on a recommendation of this plan today, or is that not the case and it just becomes something where we continue the dialogue and conversation and potentially the implementation of more changes?
Yeah, today is just to.
About this? Could I speak about this for a second? So Mr. Newton, the policy, the binding policy is the UDO conversation. This plan is non-binding. This plan must, in the end, conform. If it doesn't conform, it's a bad plan, right? Because this is a goal that we've established. So the points you want to make, I believe, should be made in the context of our UDO conversation, because that's where the rules are made. That's what controls. And then it's up to the framers of this plan to get it in line with the outcome of our conversation about the UDO. So I'm a little uneasy trying to resolve the parking conversation in the context of this vision plan rather than in a UDO discussion, because again, that's the thing that is really going to be binding on people. And personally, I would also appreciate just a short answer to the question. Is it on our agenda? I don't have our agenda. Is this an action item today? So
yes,
is the plan actually ready for us to take a vote on recommendation to the full council, or what's the status right now?
So if I may jump in quickly, the action today is for you to refer it to public hearing. I believe that will be November 22nd, where we're looking at it. Council is not expected to take action until December. So the action today is to actually refer this plan for public hearing.
Thank you. That answers my question. And I just wonder, so to your point.
And can I just jump in, Mr. Newton? Because we've got Mr. Winston who has a question, and then we're running behind already. We've still got Center City Partners who was given 30 minutes. So
I just have one more comment. I'll make it very quick. I wonder if we're putting the cart before the horse here. If we know that the UDO is what's going to control this and that there could be discrepancies in language and policy goals, I just wonder why we wouldn't address pass the UDO first. I don't know if that's in the cards, if this is something that we will pass after the UDO, but that's something that immediately jumped or came to mind for me as you gave some further clarification there, Ed. But that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Winston's next, and I'll just add also that I think we got to focus on the fact that the UDO is the policymaking tool, and anything that you can do, Michael, to strengthen that understanding in that preamble, I think would be really helpful, so that future councils, future bodies of constituents don't say, well, wait a minute, you said in this document that this is what you were going to do. And that's not what happened. So I think that language is really the critical piece. Mr. Winston, and then we'll try to wrap it up and move on to Center City Partners or University City Partners.
Yes, with that said, I like the removal of the parking minimums. This is something that I hope that we see a change to in the UDO as well. Currently, there is no tier that eliminates parking minimums. Only under very certain conditions. So that's good. I want to push back a little bit. I'd love to see the research that you speak about regarding street closures and the effects on small businesses. To be completely honest, I just don't believe it. We had our own study around the partial closure of North Tryon Street that showed the opposite. There was really very few negative impacts. The only negative impact was on a very specific class of consumer, those that wanted to go to Ruth's Chris and McCormick and Schmick's via valet. It was too difficult for those folks. Those folks who those companies thought that were particularly high spenders, and that's why it became an issue. You had other restaurants like Vapiano's that did very well and encouraged it. I'm thinking of, I know Mr. Driggs said other European cities. I would disagree with that. Look at 42nd Street, Times Square, New York City. Look at the harbor area in Baltimore. Look at places like Santa Monica in LA County. And you can go on and on and on. Look at what's the Mayor Pro Tem often talks about what the Bucks did up in Milwaukee, around their downtown area. All the data that I've ever seen and all the examples of effects of this that I've ever seen is that small businesses are buttressed when you have pedestrian-oriented, especially near downtown areas that eliminate the use of cars. It brings a certain vibrance and energy that is irreplaceable. So before we adopt this as a full council, I would love to see that data that you say presents that shows the concern about negative impacts on small businesses, because this is something that I'm going to keep pushing for. And I hope City Council, we can find 6 votes to do more permanent street closures, especially in our city areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. And I think to that point, we know that experiment, if you will, wasn't highly activated, and that makes a big difference of what's going on in the street when you do close it. So, yeah, so we need more information about it. But right now, we've got to
be clear. I don't think we need more information. I think we need to do it. I think that we're finding a lot of information to not do something that has shown to be very workable over and over and over again. And I don't think we need to have more information. I think we need to start closing streets, especially around our center city areas, around our light rails, around our gold lines. And we should have really started it last year. So whatever information that we're using to kind of further delay this, I want to see it, because like I said, I just really don't believe the assertions that are being drawn from it.
Okay.
Braxton, I'll be glad to sit down one-on-one and bring you the information that we have. The recommendation is that we study block by block and we make better trades between auto and pedestrians. So we actually create more space, and that we more actively create temporary street closures. But if there's spots when we do like this Tryon Street reimagining, and that ends up being the recommendation, let's look at the whole thing. Let's make a both societal and technical review, and then let's roll with it. But these are big systems, and I don't want us to delay. I want us to move with purpose, and I just want us to have all the information we need. But I'm glad for us to sit down. And Councilman Newton, the idea of us having something as important as parking maximums inconsistent with the UDO is not the way I want us to advance this plan. So I think we've got more conversations that we need to have. But in the end, what we recommend will be consistent with UDO.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and I appreciate your presentation. Thank you, council members, for your questions. At this point, we are being asked to vote on whether we would move this forward to have a public hearing. I think the beauty of
move it forward
is, thank you for that motion, Mr. Driggs. Do we have a second? Thank you. I support that. Mr. Newton, or I guess we'll call Mr. Driggs.
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes.
Mr. Newton?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Public hearing, referral. The next item on our calendar, and if the committee members can stay a few extra minutes so that we don't cut Darlene and Center City or University City Partners off, is we have a presentation from them on the University City Vision Plan. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ty. Are you starting us off, or are we just going to jump right to Darlene?
Wait, let's just jump right to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, members of the TPE committee and Madam Chair, for allowing us to share our vision plan. We have been working on this vision plan for the last almost 22 months. Why did we create this vision plan? And I will share with you that, as many of you know, we are seeing absolutely incredible development and investment in University City. But we also recognize at the same time, as we were meeting with developers on development projects one by one, that we were missing opportunities to partner with our developers to really start to build some of the big infrastructure, start investing in some of the bigger initiatives that creates a great place to live, work, play, and learn. We understand that the 2040 plan will eventually create a community area plan for University City, but the reality is we could not afford to wait, that we were seeing so much dynamic change in our community, and our board and our staff just felt like if we did not get more a stronger vision in place, we were going to miss incredible opportunities during this high growth period to help shape this community. The other opportunity we saw in this was to provide some transparency and some clarity to our community and to our stakeholders on how we're focusing our MSD resources, both financial and human, to help build University City during this time. We had several studies and programs that helped inform this vision plan. We did a thoroughfare study, which really helped us understand the lack and need for pedestrian safety infrastructure around our university and around our transit stations. We did a super street study, which helped us really understand the impact of high volume traffic through our education corridor. We created a J.W. Clay Station area plan. We have an evolving arts and culture district that we're working on with developers there. We did a park and greenway study a few years ago. And we've been working just really, really aggressively with the first mile, last mile transit mobility programming in partnership with CATS in the city of Charlotte. I'll share with you as well, our community engagement we feel has been very robust. You know, on the front end, we had 12 one-on-one interviews with stakeholders and employees of large employers. We did 3 focus groups with employees and residents around UNC Charlotte and in UNC Charlotte. We did a resident vision session. We did a student visioning session in partnership with Gensler, and then an intercept survey specific to crossing the streets. We had several surveys that engaged 1,500 people. We had ongoing input from some committees. And then we took the plan, we created this draft vision plan. We took this draft vision plan and we went out during the pandemic, and most of this via Zoom, but some in person, into the community, back to the folks who we engaged in the first place, to make sure that this plan represented the ideas and aspirations of our community and of our stakeholders, our businesses, our institutions, and our residents. And, you know, this work was, it was very fulfilling. It was very arduous, as you can imagine. We also had some meetings with our city council folks and several meetings with our government partners. You know, all in all, I would say that given the pandemic and given the fact that it is we had resources of 2 staff people that were working on this. I'm very satisfied with the work that both Toby and I have done in reaching back out into the community to make sure that this vision plan reflected the goals and values and aspirations of our community. I'll also share with you that our work is not done here. I think after this committee presentation, we have one more stop, and that's with the planning committee. Toby's going to share with you at the end of this deck how we're going to implement this plan. We took a list of projects and initiatives to our board. We called it was a recommendation that came from one of our stakeholder interviews that said you need to demonstrate very clearly how you're going to execute this. And they called it a 10-4 list. And what we ended up with was a 5-15 list. So that's 15 projects and initiatives in 5 years that we're going to invest in with both human resources as well as our own MSD revenue. And lastly, I will say, and I'm going to turn it over to Toby next, is that we're going to continue to share and to listen. This vision plan, you'll hear us reference it many, many times in the coming years. But this is a living document. We expect that we're going to come back and tweak things and add things, and you know, technology evolves, infrastructure evolves, and we're looking forward to using this as a guiding kind of compass for us as we continue to shape the growth and development in University City. And you'll hear me say this, or may have heard me say this in the past. And, you know, building a city is not just about building structures and systems. It's also about building community and making sure that the places that you're building are places for people. And that's what we think that we have reflected in this vision plan. So Toby, I'm going to turn it over to you, and Taiwo, I guess you're driving for Toby, and Toby, if you can just indicate when you need a slide change.
Wendy's driving it, but thank you, darling. Yeah, Toby, go on.
Great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about our collective vision for University City. And I think Darlene did a wonderful job of setting us up. Every time I present this slide, it just gives me pause to recognize again that of anywhere in the city of Charlotte, at least right now, I believe University City may change the most over 20 years, and that's for a couple of different reasons. One being the fact that starting from our roots and kind of development in 1984 through approximately 2005, that's one of the most auto-dominated periods in U.S. history. And I think that our big roads and some of our development format very much reflects that. The $1 billion investment that the city made in transit absolutely changes the game for us. And now we have one of the biggest pivots that I can imagine making to something which is much more transit oriented. I know other parts of our city one type of development format to another. And of course, change is quite difficult. And also to next slide, please. Part of that change is indicative of the fact that we're currently delivering 1,700 multifamily units a year shows the same thing. That's more units than anywhere else in the city of Charlotte, including Uptown, South End, and many other quickly growing areas of our city, which we all know cohesiveness and some character based on those assets. Next slide, please. Basically, the light rail corridor and this green line that stretches east to west connects UNC Charlotte and the University Research Park. Between the two, there's approximately 4,000 acres of land. Of course, if you're familiar with both of these assets, they're both amazing in terms of their verdant landscape, which is amazingly green. And to me, it's just so reflective of what I think the perception of suburbia was when we began to develop. Of course, our what's shown here is the urban axis did not, it developed in a very suburban way, and now is the area that will experience significant change. So what we, how this kind of drove our thinking is that where most places are built on this concept of Main and Main Street, whether it's Trade and Tryon or Camden Road and Tryon, or the corner of North Davidson and 36th Street. Now, we recognize that with our corner of Main and Main being W.T. Harris and Tryon, the busiest intersection in the state of North Carolina, that's not an option for us, and at least not today, and we can do things differently here. Recognizing that our corner of Main and Main is very much the corner of our greenway system, which stretches east to west and provides an amazing, more modern asset for multimodal, connecting the second largest employment center in the city of Charlotte to one of the largest universities in the state, or the second largest universities in the state, with teaming with 30,000 students today, and making that seamless connection through our town center may provide opportunities far into the future. Of course, that same concept is very much a 21st mobility concept, focusing on transit and the use of smaller wheeled vehicles on greenways, much like e-bikes and scooters, as they become. Please come out and see it sometime. It's amazing on a Saturday afternoon to see the number of residents who use those greenways for recreation with zero parks in University City. It's just a critical asset for us. And then finally, one signature of suburbia, of course, is the fact that it's a little bit anywhere USA, and that's something we're very much aiming to change through so many ways. Next slide, please. Early in our work, we were challenged to make sure that this fit directly in with the 2040 comp plan. And we did that and thought a lot about it throughout our process and aimed to make things line up. Whether it's creating transit-oriented and trail-oriented development, like I just spoke about, or creating a healthy and safe communities with regard to, how you have tried to touch every base in the comp plan. And of course, the comp plan is a 30,000-foot view for our city. Ours is much more fine-grained and even builds on our own area plan to be slightly more modern, and also projects and concepts we can implement over time. Next slide, please. So again, there are these four concepts that we worked against very hard, and that's the creation of an urban spine and core, developing a 21st century mobility system, which gives us the opportunity to leave our vehicles and use other modes, create character and culture for our community, and also creating this green belt. Next slide, please. So I just want to speak very quickly, and each one of our concepts was given a couple of slides, but I do want to highlight a few facts and then kind of the projects that we are aiming to accomplish along the way. So, of course, we have 4 light rail stations here in University City, and through analysis, we have 176 undeveloped or well underdeveloped acres of land within a half-mile transit stations. That tells me that we have about 176 acres of land that'll be developed in the next decade or two, and we should probably give them some direction on what we want to look like in the future. We have so many businesses on transit and have so many employees who live with access to it. It's incumbent on us to help them connect easier to transit by walking and biking so that we can make better use of our investment in light rail. Next slide, please. A little more on our urban spine, and what you see in the center of this is a rendering of what we expect to look like in the future, whether it's 20 years or 40 years. The reality is that we will densify on our transit corridor. That actually for our city and county, particularly the JW Clay Station, which is the station directly across from UNC Charlotte and the fourth most used station in the entire system. That's a real advantage, given the fact that we are located in Northeast Charlotte and had the chance to create a regional center there that can not only be of resource to people in the city of Charlotte, but also and hopefully attract taxpayers from across our county borders, which can very much enrich our commercial tax base as a strategic point for our city to, of course, lower the tax burden in our own community. The JW Clay Station will continue to strengthen over time, given the fact that the university is such a powerhouse with 30,000 students now and adding students almost annually at this point. And we kind of are planting our flag here as basically being the town center for our community. We're really focused on making the JW Clay Station something very special and where we put a lot of our energy so that when you come to University City, there is no question that there is a there there. Next slide, please. 21st century mobility is so critical for us, as I mentioned, and that's just based on the fact that we have existing 14 miles of greenway right now, eventually connecting to the larger Cross Charlotte system. So we're not just looking to take advantage of our own assets, but city assets and the vision for our own city and investing in these types of things. We have some success in our community already with UNC Charlotte hosting over 1 million dockless bike rides on their campus since 2017. Right now, it's deadly to cross our streets with some of those bikes, and we aim to change that through this plan so that we can expand that bikeability and walkability throughout our community. Next slide, please. So part of that is recognizing that we have to be better at connecting to our transit stations, and then in the future, adding mobility hubs, as JL mentioned in his presentation from CATS. The concept of mobility stations is something that was never even considered just a short time ago in 2015 when our area plan was developed. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this work, is so that we can pick up on some of those more modern concepts, generally within our own adopted area plan, but also to kind of highlight areas where we can do better and really want to put a flag in the ground. One additional area, and I think this is so exciting, and my hat's off to our city council for recognizing that we have significant sidewalk gaps throughout our city and aiming to fund sidewalk bonds that will help repair those gaps in the future and enhance the walkability of our community. Of course, a big piece of the puzzle for us, and it's honestly one of the most intense capital investments that I can think of making, and that is developing connecting roads so that we're not required to use major thoroughfares for every trip. Of course, as we densify and as more cars hit those thoroughfares, there'll be increased demand to widen those, and that will essentially create islands of our community where you can't possibly cross the street safely. Maybe I can, but I'm certainly not going to do that with my grandparents and my children at a stoplight crossing 8 or maybe 10 lanes of traffic. So that's a big focus for us, and that's encouraging walking and rolling. And those connecting streets are so critical for reducing the pressure on our major thoroughfares. Next slide, please. And of course, there's this greenbelt concept, and it's something that I'm absolutely so excited to work on. I think that what I've discussed so far, I think anybody could maybe land on some of those things, recognize that we've got a problem in some areas, but focus on a built asset that currently exists and recognizing that it'd be so much powerful than it is today. It's so exciting. The land is there, and that's one of the most difficult things to acquire in building capital projects. It's a matter of improving this along the way. And this is somewhere we aim to spend our own capital for certain, and it doesn't take a lot to simply improve how the greenway looks and how it acts, creating kind of place-making opportunities, and also to make it more of a transportation asset than is a recreation asset. Both are absolutely critical, and right now we have the recreation piece. It's about adding the other piece. And through our work, we recognize that, of course, 51% of Charlotteans would like to bike more. 62% do not think it's easy to bicycle in Charlotte. We have this asset with significant greenway. And also, through some of our survey work, we picked up on several investments that the public would like to see on our greenways, and have talked to Parks and Rec about the reality of some of those, knowing that others will take so much more time, for example, adding restroom facilities to our greenways. And I'll reference back to your recognition that the county generally owns this realm for our community. However, I know the city does own the realm for the most part of transportation. So it's not, so let's just say it's not just a recreational asset, it's very much also a transportation asset. So we're aiming to improve on it. It's in both veins. Next slide, please. And I'll slide through this very quickly because I already described many of the things on this slide, but I will highlight again that just simply creating new connections to our greenway, improving that line within itself, and then also creating places to walk and bike through University City. It really is the tide that raises all ships here, and I was so thrilled to hear that through our kind of second round of public outreach that so many of our business partners and also residents, they recognize the same thing. Next slide, please. And then finally, there is no question that we will struggle to adapt our suburban format over the next couple of decades. And this is not something that happens overnight. We do have assets in place already that will help us move in that direction, and things that we're focusing on to kind of steer our ship to creating an urban center, but also to, and really through the UDO, and that's where we're dialing into it right now, watching some of our massive tracks that are currently locked up with big box development and huge parking lots, helping those change over time, be something different. You know, it's there are some wonderful examples in our own city and just across our county borders of places that have changed like this, and it's just incumbent on the UDO and really on us to help the UDO find the ways to make these investments work best within reality. Next slide, please. So to that end, it's a reinvestment and transformation of large parcels. We see this need to celebrate the fact that we have the second largest youth research university in the city of Charlotte by adding that brand and celebrating that brand across our community here in UNC Charlotte and University City. I think back to my alma maters and the fact that you can barely escape the team color anywhere in town. And if we are going to help our own city recognize that we may be a city of transients, but we most certainly have something to celebrate here, that's incumbent on their home neighborhood to start. Building on the direction of the 2040 comp plan, so many of our goals are to create that 10-minute neighborhood. And then also, kind of in that same vein, we aim to kind of continue to create things for ourselves, including our Kids Fest, which has become a regional draw and has had an incredible increase in visitors over a short history. And then also things like our farmers market, which now runs April through November. And it solves so many problems for us, from creating community to filling gaps in our food network, and then also providing economic development opportunities for small businesses. So next slide, please. I want to roll through these here very quickly, just in the interest of time.
And Toby, I'll just do a quick comment because I don't know, do any council members have to drop off? I know we do have some questions, so. Be unfortunate. We do want to save time for questions.
Sure, and I'll move these through, if I appreciate that. We'll get through very quickly here. So as I mentioned, we want to establish a town center for university city in Northeast Charlotte that can bring people across the county border to enhance our tax base. Next slide. We want to complete the investments were spelled out in our own area plan adopted in 2015. Many of those are connecting streets that were funded by the NECE program. Of course, as construction costs and labor costs explode, this program is going to be running out of money, and we have to find ways to continue the work that was set forth in this plan so that we can meet the projects that were outlined in it, and honestly probably got the support of the community back in 2015. Next slide. One of those assets, of course, or in the NECE projects, is the extension of the streetscape down McCullough Drive. It's such a wonderful investment for us, and through that investment, we started to recognize that we can develop an urban trail over time to help out creating a parallel network to Tryon Street, so people can walk and bike more comfortably. No one really wants to walk on a street that has 35,000 cars and a train going through the middle of it. At least not if they have an alternative, and it's very much our intent to create that alternative for people. Next slide. Last mile service we've talked about a lot, and it really was a focus of a recent trip for us, going to Columbus to see how this is working. I firmly believe that e-bikes and scooters are the way of the future, and that they're probably a solution to our problem. I don't think that was a real thing just a few years ago, and now it is very much becoming something real and something we have to invest in. Next slide. I've talked a little bit about how we enhance our greenways, not just for mobility, but also to improve character and the usability of our submarket. Next slide. And I think this is so important that we have so many places where we have to improve the pedestrian realm, University City, on the front of sidewalks, that we're having to focus where we were doing that, particularly around UNC Charlotte, to make sure that our 30,000 students can not just be safe crossing the street, but feel safe crossing the street. And that perception is reality. And if we're going to give them the chance to get off campus and into the community, it's important that we build for that. Of course, I know the city is investing in connecting to transit stations so that we can take full advantage of our $1 billion investment there. And I'm excited for that future. Next slide, please. I've talked about UNC Charlotte, and I've just got to say, by having worked here in 5 years, I think I adopted a third alma mater. I'm so proud of their work, where they've come in 5 years, where they want to be in 20 years. And as I said, as a city of transients, we should all respect that work. And I can't wait to celebrate it over the future as we reflect their brand throughout our submarket. Next slide. And I've talked a little bit about not the fact, and I think it's not lost on some of the people on this call, is that we constantly advocate for community assets and let you know how we think things should work. But also, it's incumbent that we let you know that we're doing this work we're doing this work with you and creating our own assets, and that is everything from advocating to the location of our library and working with the county on that, but also creating events and festivals and farmers markets to the point that now I think we have 60 event days a year hosted by our small staff of 3. Next slide, please. We have a lot to do in the realm of focusing investments in placemaking, which we've looked at doing along transit stations and also in greenways, and kind of repairing some of the aged infrastructure, which will be with us for many, many more years to come. And then the last slide for this piece of the presentation, that's recognizing that there are very few places in Charlotte that are as diverse as University City. That's partially due to the type of housing we have here, the cost of living we can offer people, the so many amenities that we have in our own community, and the fact that we have an incredible university here that makes us both young and old, and has so many international students that adds such a unique character to where we live here in University City. Next slide, please. So as Darlene mentioned, we have worked through public input to start to outline where we're going to be investing our dollars directly in tandem with this plan. So it's not simply painting a pretty picture, but it's starting to outline the fact that we're going to invest in this urban trail in the future. We're going to send the city recommendations for the UDO so that we're building the way that we need to build and the way that we can start to change these large parcels and big parking lots to something else. Next slide, please. And that's for the first couple of years. Of course, we have 5 years of investments to go, and all may not come to fruition. But we're not going to achieve any of these things without putting a flag in the ground and starting to bite off projects and see what we can get done. Last slide, please. So with that, I look forward to your questions. We're certainly excited about this plan. It's the first time we've had the chance to come to this committee to present it, and I look forward to your questions.
Toby and Darlene, it's really helpful to get that update. There is so much going on up in that area there, and some really critical questions to answer, such as how to make it more pedestrian friendly. So I appreciate that, laying out that vision for us. I'm going to start with Mr. Winston, and then I see Mr. Driggs, and we will try to wrap it up then, because I know we all are heading up to Winston-Salem. Go ahead, Mr. Winston.
Yeah, I just have one comment. Toby, I agree with you, the assertion that University City is unique. Obviously, you outlined so many reasons why University City is unique. But I would say there's no shame in not being unique, in that, how a university has developed is in a suburban fashion with suburban sprawl, with big roads that are very hard to cross for pedestrians, and that describes a whole lot of Charlotte, right? And I appreciate it. I really do appreciate the tone and message that you are taking forward with presenting this plan. You are recognizing the status quo and that it needs to change. And you're identifying where to put that change. You're saying you're very car-oriented place, and that has to change if you want to keep going, right? You talked about connecting inside streets so that they are opposite ends of that other means of connection for drivers, as well as pedestrians. That really that's the kind of conversation that I want to have with my constituents around Providence Road, right? We hear issues around this week after week after week in different, month after month in different parts of town, but we are not having conversations by leaders in those areas that really kind of get to the brass tacks of things. So I appreciate the way this is being presented. And I hope that other places around the city, because really you are more like most of the 300 square miles of the city of Charlotte, to develop like that. So kudos to you for the way you're talking about it and the way you're looking at it. And I hope it is an example to more folks and more leaders that are doing this planning work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Darlene and Toby, I wanted to tell you I'm sorry that you had to rush through your presentation and that we're now pressed for time. This is important work, and I really appreciate the creativity and the thoughtfulness that went into the plan that you've just laid out for us. Since we are pressed for time, I will just tell you in general, I'd like to spend some time with you to think about how we can actually further these goals, because your financial resources are very limited. Your actual authority to require people to conform to the goals of the plan is limited. So we're going to have to work with you and take on board and think about, what the city of Charlotte can do to make some of the things happen that you're contemplating in this plan. So I would just suggest that we talk again and again. I appreciate what you've done here. It's a great plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your continued support and advocacy and your interest in helping us build University City. This is an edge city that is growing and changing every day. And it's going to take a village. It's going to take a village.
And with that, I'd also like to acknowledge that Darlene Heater will be moving on. And Darlene, you have done an amazing job with University City Partners. This vision that you and your team have laid out is a tremendous vision for growth into what's going to become what is now a huge asset for the city, but it's going to become a very unique asset for the city. And I know that Toby, you're coming in as the interim, and you're going to continue that without any hitches at all. I know, because you've been a big part. So we do want to thank you for your leadership, Darlene.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have a date that you're going to be leaving University City Partners.
So I'll be here for a little while longer. I'm going to stay through the end of November, and I'll transition December 1st.
That's not that much in our world, but
it isn't. It really isn't. But this community is in great hands. You know, I tell folks that the day I hired Toby is the day I started training him for my job.
Well, and it's very clear, Toby. You know, I don't think anyone's going to bat an eye that Toby is going to pick up the mantle and continue with this vision, and anything that we can do to be helpful, move it forward. You know, I know that Toby's got those relationships, so we appreciate all of that, all that you've done.
Thank you.
Both of you. And with that, I think we have finished, unless there's any more comments committee members have.
Move to adjourn. All in favor, disconnect.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Travels.
Bye.
Thank you.